I finally have the time and wherewithal to write this next bit. If you haven't seen my previous post, you may want to start there. If you have, things only got worse. The auto shop was built into the back of a gas station in the middle of nowhere, with fuel selling for extortion prices and an attached convenience store that looked sketchier than a liquor shop in a crack neighborhood. I was surprised there weren't any bullet holes in the glass. At least it was better than being stranded in the desert. Vasily swerved into the parking lot, sending one of the several open cases of loose ammunition on his dashboard tumbling to the floor on the passenger side. He mumbled a curse in an indeterminate Slavic language, then an apology to me in English. As he exited the van, I nearly bolted out of it myself, having no desire to stick around. I didn't know how I was going to get myself and Ilya out of the situation yet, but I would have to make myself sound vulnerable enough that the shapeshifter would want to keep me alive. That would buy me some time. "Hey, Vasily." It looked up. "Yes." "Just so you know, my dad is the one who's going to be paying for repairs." I pulled out my phone. "I'll text him now, but he's a brain surgeon, so he works weird hours." It raised an eyebrow. "Brain surgeon, you say?" "Yeah, he makes a lot of money, so he can afford any bill you send him. Just have to wait until he sees my message." "Ah, then don't worry," it said. "I have time." He gestured to the empty parking lot. "No other customers, you see?" I played along. "Thanks, I appreciate it. In the meantime, do you think I could buy some snacks from your convenience store? This should be enough for at least a bag of chips." I pulled out the $40 I made in tips the day before as obliviously as possible to really sell the narrative. I didn't like giving up that much money, but it was a small price to pay for buying myself some time. The shapeshifter's smile widened and it took the cash. "Yes, it's about enough." "Awesome," I replied. "If it's alright, I'd like to check on the flowers to make sure none of them spilled." Of course," the shapeshifter said. "Take them to walk-in fridge at back of shop. They stay fresh in there." I didn't like how eagerly it had suggested I put the flowers in his walk-in, but I had to play along now. I could find a way to avoid it later. "Let me help you unhitch my car, and then I'll do that." I put my phone back in the inside pocket of my jacket, and as I did so, got an idea. So far, I didn't have much knowledge on how this creature operated, but it seemed like Ilya did. I waited for the shapeshifter to retreat into the auto shop, and when it was out of sight, I retrieved my phone and opened the notes app. I steeled myself for the next part. The idea of touching a severed hand wasn't exactly appealing, but I didn't have much other choice. I counted to 3, then opened the meat cooler and grabbed Ilya's hand. The feel of it was awful. It was already cold and clammy, like a piece of raw chicken with the skin still attached. Until then, I had always taken for granted how warm human bodies actually are. When you touch a dead one, that warmth is gone in a way that makes it feel unnatural. You touch a dead body and your instincts tell you there's something missing, something wrong. It's worse when it still moves. "Tell me how to help you," I whispered fiercely. "Type it out." I then shoved the cold hand into my coat pocket with my phone. It began squirming against my chest, and I choked down a wave of disgust. I grabbed a bouquet and strolled over to the sketchy convenience store, trying not to gag from the sensation of wriggling in my pocket. When I got inside, I could still feel it typing, so I stalled by pretending to get distracted and looking for snacks around the store. I knew it was done when it pushed the phone halfway out of my pocket. I retrieved it and read the note. "Bucket of blood on middle shelf far left. Make me whole. Do not close door." I'm aware most people would balk at the idea of encountering several gallons of blood, and while it still made me uneasy, you have to remember that I've been working at an occult flower shop for a year and a half now. Hell, I've had to carry vases of blood for a few clients with flowers stuffed into them. Don't worry, my boss bought them from a blood bank. At least I'm pretty sure they did. I was accustomed to following cryptic delivery instructions. After all, that's what these were. Delivery instructions. I had to deliver the bucket of blood to Ilya, or maybe deliver Ilya to the bucket to make him whole. And I had to make sure the walk-in door didn't close behind me. The issue was accomplishing this without the shapeshifter noticing. I remember the last delivery I done with a vase of blood in it just a few months ago. It was for a few vampires, as an appetizer for their Christmas dinner. I didn't go inside their manor for obvious reasons, just left it at their gate during the daytime and sent a picture, but I recall the fluid being heavier than water. If that bucket contained all of Ilya's blood, it would be about 8 gallons. Way too much for me to carry on my own. You received text back? I startled at the sound of the shapeshifter's voice. I hadn't even heard it enter. Ooh, you scared me, I said, feigning laughter. I wondered why I hadn't heard the bell on the door, and when I glanced at it, I realized the creature had taken the bell down on purpose. It didn't want me to hear it. I fake-checked my phone. Not yet, I replied. He might be in an operating room right now. I'll let you know as soon as I hear from him though. It eyed me for a moment, but seemed to buy the excuse for now. I wondered how long that would last. I look at your car, it said. Your radiator is leak. That was either a lie or it had punctured my radiator specifically so it could charge me for that. Radiators were one of the most expensive things to fix. If I survived this at all, I wouldn't be surprised if I made it out with a bunch of holes in my engine. Wow, I had no idea, I said, playing oblivious again. I'm glad you caught that. Yeah, I'll tell my dad. How much will the repairs be? $20,000. Oh, that's pretty reasonable actually. I lied. Easily the dumbest phrase that ever come out of my mouth. Yeah, I'll tell him. You don't have to wait for his permission to work on it for now. He'll agree to whatever bill you send him anyways. It raised an eyebrow. This is reasonable to you? Yeah, this is just a temporary car anyway, I replied. My real car is a Cybertruck, and it's also in the shop. Damn thing keeps breaking down, and repairs for it are way pricier. $20,000 is nothing by comparison. It snorted when I said Cybertruck, which was a good sign. After all, a Cybertruck constantly breaking down was the most realistic thing I said thus far. It took a second to think, then nodded and turned to walk away. You tell me when your dad takes back, Doc. Will do, I said, giving it a thumbs up. The door closed behind it, and I exhaled 2 tons of stress. I had evaded its suspicions for now, but the longer I drew out the ruse, the more likely it was to fail. It occurred to me I could try to steal the keys to his van, but I had seen it put the keys in his pocket. I had had to steal them off his person, and I had a feeling wrestling a shapeshifter who was twice my size and strong enough to dent my rims with one finger wouldn't go well for me. I couldn't see a way out, but Ilya seemed to know more than me, and this was likely his shop. Hell, he was probably the person the shapeshifter was currently disguised as. When I finally caught my breath, I took a moment to think. Somehow or another, I needed to reunite Ilya's blood with his flesh. I considered putting blood inside some of the vases and carrying them to the meat cooler, but then the shapeshifter would wonder why I was taking flowers back out of the van when I was supposed to be bringing them to the walk-in. Maybe I could find a way to bring the meat inside. I found a garbage bin near the register and pulled out the bag. There was a roll of opaque white bags underneath it. As I pulled the rolls of bags out, I noticed there was also a shotgun under the register. That might have been a good option if I had known how to operate a gun, but I'd never been much of a gun guy. I didn't even know how to check if the gun was loaded, let alone load it myself. But Ilya would. He was my ticket out. I grabbed the roll in the bin, then headed for the walk-in. A blast of cold air hit me in the face when I opened it. I blinked, then glanced around the door, keeping it barely cracked open. There were at least 20 food-grade buckets, translucent but stained yellow with age and use, tops covered with plastic wrap. 2 of them carried what looked like ranch dressing. The other 18 were full of pints upon pints of human blood, dark red and congealed by the cold. The coppery smell was overwhelming, and I wanted to shut the door again, plugging my nose in disgust. I glanced inside once last time, scanning the shelves on the left for the bucket Ilya mentioned. Cautiously, I placed the garbage bin in front of the door to keep it from slamming closed, then pulled the bucket off the shelf, doing my best not to drop it. It was so heavy I couldn't carry it for more than a second, and I barely managed to lower it to the ground without spilling it everywhere. I dragged it right next to the door and nearly leapt out of the walk-in, not wanting to get locked inside. There would be no going back after this. If I got caught during this next part, I was done for. I swallowed, then reached into my jacket and pulled out Ilya's hand. "Try to stay still," I whispered. I gently pulled the plastic wrap off and dropped Ilya's hand in. I pulled off a few black garbage bags off the roll, then stuffed them into my jacket pocket and headed towards the van. I jogged out to the van, trying to stay out of the shapeshifter's line of sight. Before climbing inside, I looked over my shoulder to make sure it was still in the auto shop. It was currently digging around under my car's hood, presumably ripping out various crucial parts of my engine and breaking them beyond repair. I hid a grimace. The milk crates full of flowers were still next to the meat cooler. I took one of them and pulled out most of the floral arrangements, leaving 2 of them inside so it would look less suspicious. I lined the crate with the garbage bag to cover the holes in the milk crate, hopefully masking its contents, then began wedging pieces of meat between the vases. It was heavy, but bearable. I marked where the shapeshifter was one more time, still damaging my car, then lugged the crate out of the van and carried it into the store. When I arrived, some of the volume of blood had decreased, which I reckon meant it was working. I set the flowers on the table, then gently lowered the meat into the bucket, not wanting the blood to splash all over me and give me away. For 2 more trips, I managed to repeat this process, briskly carrying a crate full of meat and flowers to the store, then one by one, setting chunks of butchered and plastic wrapped flesh into the bucket and letting Ilya's severed hand unwrap them. On my second stop, I made the mistake of looking inside it, where I saw a lump of human meat pulsing and wriggling as it welded itself back together. My stomach twisted with revulsion. I tried not to look after that. When I made it back to the van for my final trip, there was enough remaining meat in there that I could fit it into the milk crate easily, but a new issue presented itself. There were no more flowers. I'd just be carrying a milk crate right by the shapeshifter, full of something he couldn't see, without any apparent reason. Worse, these were the body parts it hadn't wrapped up yet, meaning the blood might just be visible enough through the garbage bag, and it could noticeably stain my clothes. My cover will almost definitely be blown. I took a deep breath. One way or another, it was going to find out anyway. If it didn't catch me now, the mass of flesh currently gathering itself together would give me away regardless. There was no going back now. Either I'd pull this off, or I'd die. I grabbed the milk crate, then started piling in Ilya's final remains. When I was done, I hopped out of the van, then glanced at the auto shop. The shapeshifter wasn't visible. A very, very bad sign. I couldn't let that discourage me now, and I couldn't wait any longer either. I grabbed the crate and rushed to the store, darting my eyes around in search of the shapeshifter. Still, it was nowhere in sight. A shudder ran up my spine, and I got the distinct sense I was being stalked. No going back. If I chickened out now, I'd be dead. Mere yards from my objective, I threw caution to the wind, kicking open the door. As I lugged the crate further towards the halfway assembled meat monstrosity that was molding itself into the gas station's actual owner, I realized I heard the bell ring when the door opened, meaning the shapeshifter had hung it back while I was gone. I realized it too late. A massive fist slammed into the side of my head. The crate flew out of my hands, scattering cold chunks of flesh across the linoleum. I tried to catch my fall, grasping a shelving unit to my right. The creature smacked my arm away. I tumbled to the floor, staining my floral print suit jacket with Ilya's blood, and possibly some of my own. I tried to get up. The shapeshifter pinned me to the floor. Its weight alone was enough to hold me down, its large hand like an iron clamp tying around my neck. From his back, 4 appendages shot out like scorpion tails with razor-edged spikes at the tips, limbs made of scalpels, bone saws, ready to dissect me. A malevolent sneer split his face. "It will be much easier to find food," it hissed, "as a delivery driver." A loud squelching noise came from behind us. The shapeshifter darted its eyes to the source, only for its face to instantly explode. No one prepares you for how loud a gunshot is. Worse, when it's in an enclosed space. My ears rang, and I clasped my hand over them, briefly losing my sense of hearing. Some of the shapeshifter's viscera, inhuman splotches of green blood and chunks of exoskeleton, splattered onto my face. Some of it landed in my mouth. It was bitter and slimy, and I gagged in revulsion, trying to spit it out. Another gunshot. The creature let go of my neck, and I wiped its fluid away from my eyes. Despite the wounds it had sustained, it was still alive, standing up to face the new threat. Its legs still looked human, overalls still hanging off them, while its top half had split into 3 heads. It screeched like a bat, extending its insectal limbs out and preparing to pounce. I glanced behind me. Ilya was leaning on the counter as his final leg reformed itself, buck-ass naked, and reloaded his shotgun. He shouted something in a Slavic language, and the shapeshifter lunged at him. He finished reloading just in time, blasting it in one of his faces. The gunshots slowed it down, but they weren't deterring it. It would stagger. Bits of it would fly off, but it still lumbered towards Ilya, gradually cornering him behind the counter. From behind, I saw its wounds knitting themselves back together. Unless we found some other solution, we were both dead. I looked around the store for anything that could help. My head felt hazy, concussed from the creature's first strike to my head. To his right, Ilya was passing by shelves of cigarettes and vapes, below which I spotted a display full of lighters and matches. And we were, after all, at a gas station. I realized my next course of action, and a surge of adrenaline shot through me. I staggered to my feet and pulled out my phone. "Hey, dipshit." Both Ilya and the shapeshifter turned around. "I'm calling the police." This was a lie, of course. Even if I succeeded, I didn't want the cops showing up to see a dead gas station clerk and my clothes covered in blood. But the shapeshifter wouldn't want that either. The last thing it needed was the cops finding its walk-in full of evidence. The creature's limbs gripped the counter, and it prepared to jump after me. I shouted at Ilya, "Pump number 1." I put the phone up to my ear and feigned calling. The creature hissed at me, and I spun around, whipping open the door and sprinting towards pump number 1. Before the door closed, I heard a ding on the register. Ilya had gotten the message. As I ran out towards the pump, muttering into the phone as if I was talking to 911 dispatch, the shapeshifter flew through the door behind me. It gained on me, nearly shredding my jacket as its razor-tipped appendages swung wildly at me. I felt its spikes graze the back of my neck, opening cuts that bled down into the collar of my shirt. Another gunshot slowed it down just in time. When I reached the pump, I tossed my phone aside, then grabbed the hose and pulled the lever. The shapeshifter reeled as I doused it in gasoline. It let out an ear-rending screech, and one of its appendages whipped out at me. Another gunshot, and a limb flew off before stabbing me, instead nearly taking off my ear. Behind it, I saw Ilya approaching with a Zippo lighter. The creature blocked my view, its 3 mouths hanging open as it prepared to tackle me again. I dropped the hose and bolted, just in time for Ilya to toss the lighter. The creature went up in flames. It screeched so loud the windows on the gas station cracked, and I clasped my hands over my ears. The fire was bright, hot, and I staggered away from it on instinct. The shapeshifter's carapace cracked and peeled, emulating its insides and boiling its blood. It smelled atrocious. I coughed and sputtered, trying to expel the noxious smoke from my lungs. The creature was little more than a charred lump of chitin and molten tar, dead as ashes, and I half expected the pump to go up with it. Before it could, white clouds of carbon and aerosol smothered the fire. Ilya had the same thought, and while I had been coughing and hacking up smoke, he'd grab a fire extinguisher from the store. The adrenaline rush faded. I wanted to take a deep breath, but the smoke and odor still choked the air. My head was suddenly pounding, my eardrums ringing and sore. I felt like I was about to pass out. I needed a refuge, a safe space to rest, and my first thought was my car. It was probably busted beyond repair, but it was familiar, reassuring, practically my home. I stumbled towards the auto shop, letting Ilya take care of the rest. I collapsed into the driver's seat, taking off my jacket and tossing it aside. At some point, I'd have to figure out how to explain this one to the dry cleaners. I still don't know. Suggestions in the comments would be appreciated. In the moment, I decided I'd think about that when I got back into town. I shut the car door, leaned back, and closed my eyes. About 15 minutes later, I heard a knock on my window. It was Ilya, who had thankfully found some clothes during the time I spent resting in my car. It was strange, looking at him now. The shapeshifter had taken his form when I first saw it, and I spent so much time being afraid of something that looked like Ilya that, even knowing this was the real guy, I couldn't quite shake the fear. I reluctantly rolled down the window, just a hair. How do I know you're not the shapeshifter again? You want to see what remains? He said, gesturing towards the molten heap next to pump number 1. I nodded. Point taken. I stepped out of my car, rubbing my eyes. The sun was rising and I hadn't slept. I don't know how I'm going to get home, I said. Ilya laughed, deep and hearty and a bit too loud. I heard it from the shapeshifter, but coming from the real Ilya, it didn't sound as menacing. There was warmth behind it now. Humanity. Not to worry, my friend, he said. I fix your car. I don't think I can afford it. You bring me back? Ilya replied, patting his chest. Make me whole. Way I see things, you already pay for it. I smiled wearily, then shook his hand. I'll take that deal.